part of the way that we have imagined building this organization and the model of organizing that we believe in is one where we share our stories with one another, and that is a place where we find commonality. That's a place where we connect. So we both want to share a little bit of our stories about how we got here, and in a way, hopefully, that you all can find yourselves in as well, right? Because this campaign, while it's the two of us sitting up here, this is about all of us. So, my father was in the military, so I grew up all over the place, but I landed in New Bern, North Carolina, when I was 16, and I went to North Carolina State to go to school, and it was while I was at State that I came to the realization that there was some stuff going on in the world that I wasn't real excited about being a part of, and I think having grown up in military towns and on military bases, and I think having more access to kids of color than I think most white kids do, and also being born in the most magical period of time in history where there's this thing called hip-hop that was happening, I really just had kind of a critical thinking about race as far as I can remember. And so when I got to school, I was largely doing that in the context of like community service kind of work. And how do you bridge gaps, by people who have resources, sharing them with folks who don't. And I went to this conference once for some folks who were doing that work, and the keynote speaker got on stage, and he was like, yeah, if you guys put, 1/10 of the energy into dealing with the symptoms of problems as you did with like actually dealing with the causes for why things happen, then like maybe actual change could go down, right? I went outside, fell to pieces, cried for like 15 minutes, everything in my life is wrong, I need to do something different, right? And so I became an activist and then an organizer, and decided shortly thereafter that I had really always wanted to teach high school, and so why wasn't I doing that? And so I went back and got certified to teach because it felt like I wanted to do two things. I wanted to teach high school kids history, so that kids could understand why the world looked like it looked, why they were in it where they were in it, and that it was only ever people like them that had made it be something different. That felt like a really important way to spend my life. And the second part was, it felt like if we could organize teachers, right? And this was the frame at the time, right? And now I'm clear that it's kind of the whole school community, but if we could organize teachers, we could have a lot of power. And we could really change some things. And so, I went back to school, got certified to teach, and I got my first job. I was teaching at Apex High. I taught there for 3 years. And at that point, I'm an activist, right? So as soon as I get my job, I want to join my union, right? Because that's what you do. And I spent the better part of 2 years trying to track down the rep at the school, and the better part of the third year asking that person over and over and over again for a form, right? So I finally joined, but most of the organizing, most of the work I was doing was, I was really active in the anti-war movement. I did work, anti-violence work with men, like violence prevention work with men. And I was just learning how to teach, and I was like, yeah, there isn't a vehicle for me to be doing organizing around education, so I'll just learn how to teach and do my, spend my energy in other places. Then I got a job in Durham at Hillside High, which is one of it's the equivalent of, why am I blanking? Dudley, right? So it's like one of the historically black high schools in the state, has this very proud tradition, and that's where I wanted to be. And so I went and I got my job at Hillside, and on the third day there, kids started asking if I was going to come back because the school was a nightmare. Talking about the breaking of the fights. In my first semester, I think I broke up a fight once a week right in front of my room, and there was blood on the floor, like, regularly. And you'd walk in the hallway at any point, and there'd be 75 kids standing there, and you'd walk up and you're like, you gonna go to class? And they're like, no. It's like, what am I supposed to do here? Right? And so people left in September, people left in October, people left in November, and it just, the kids knew it, the kids internalized it, right? I had given them no indication that I was going anywhere, but they were like, are you coming back? Just because they had internalized that people weren't going to stick out with them. And it made sense that people weren't sticking out with them because the place was awful, right? And so me and my kind of a crew of younger folks in the building who we were just like at the end of every day just grabbing each other and like pulling our neck above the water, got together and started to organize. And the work that we did became what we started calling Victory Friday, which then sort of morphed into a kind of a way of organizing that has turned now into Red for Ed on Wednesdays. So a lot of the kind of early thinking around the organizing we're doing now was developed while we were at Hillside just to survive. Because I wasn't, I was like a 28-year-old junk talking white boy in this like historically black school. I wasn't trying to come in there and make waves, but we weren't going to make it. I wasn't going to survive. Our kids weren't going to survive, so we started organizing. But there was no union presence in the building. There was like a 5-year-old bulletin board, up in the workroom. When we were having these conflicts with our principal and trying to push, like there wasn't a union presence. When our kids a couple of our students were murdered in my period of time there, and it was just us. Nobody from any other school looked out. Nobody reached out. Nobody cared. Right? It was just us, and that was pretty awful. And so I worked with a group of folks in Durham that we were seeing the change that was happening at the state level and seeing it as part of something that was happening at a national level, and decided that we needed to build some political organization. We needed to have the ability to fight back against these folks. And so we started an organization called People's Durham, and I was organizing around education work, but not in the union, just because it didn't feel like there was a home. We had a campaign in 2010 around the state budget cuts. We saved 185 teaching jobs. And during the campaign, the union was backdooring us. They were telling people rumors about us. They weren't coming to any meetings to connect with us around stuff. We would go to a school board meeting. We'd turn out 50 or 60 of our folks, parents in the mix, kids in the mix, and the union leadership would be there with one other person. And we would have filled up the room. And so it just was like, the union is not the place for me. This is not my home. This is not the organization. I don't want to be there. And every time I interacted, it just didn't feel good. And then in 2012, our heroes, our leaders, the folks who are putting it on the line again this week in Chicago went on strike. And they went on strike, against Rahm Emanuel, 6 months after he's out of the White House. Right, so he just left like probably the second most powerful position on the planet, and now this group of folks led by this, somebody said the loudest voice, right, this very, very powerful black woman taking on Rahm Emanuel, and it was like, oh my God, this is everything. This is all I ever wanted. And they had spent the year, and what we learned pretty quickly was that there was a crew of folks that had built a caucus. And they said, our caucus needs to reconceive of how this union works. And they got elected, and they spent a year door knocking in black and brown communities and poor communities and saying, what do y'all need? And so when they went on strike, right, benefits and salaries was in the mix for sure, but their frame was the school Chicago students deserve. And it was like, wait a second. And they started talking about how they were going on strike against educational apartheid. I'm getting chills saying this right now, and they won. Yeah. Right, I don't got kids of my own, but I can only imagine that the first week of school is the most blessed time for parents in the whole world. Because it's like, amen, y'all going back. Bye-bye. Yep. And the Chicago teachers struck for the whole first week of school, and instead of their parents, and instead of the parents revolting and fighting against them, right, in the ways that the school board wanted them to do, in the ways the super wanted them to do, the mayor wanted them to do, they had been door knocking on their parents' doors. And so out on the picket line every single day was their parents. And they won. And so I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was walking down the street with my best friend, who's my roommate currently, and he's the guy who I've been thinking through all this stuff with for years. And I said, we were walking down the street, and we've been trying to figure out how to build a thing at the state level here, because it's now 2012, 2013. We're getting viciously beat up. Reverend Barber and them are building a fight back, but there's not the same kind of political power that they were trying to build. It was sort of more of a resistance. And so we started thinking about the union. I remember walking down the street with Sindolo, my roommate, and I just looked at him and said, I need to go work in the union, don't I? And he was like, yeah, you do. And it felt so awful. It felt so bad. It just was not what I wanted to do, but it just felt really clear, right? If you look at the landscape of the state of North Carolina, this is the organization, right? And so I went to a convention, and fortunately, it's 2013. We're like 9 years into Reverend Barber and the HK-on-J movement, and he gives a speech from the floor and it moves the whole room. And our late president, Rodney Ellis, rest in peace, gets on the mic and says, we need to move from a service model to an organizing model. And I was like, yeah. So I text the one person in the room that I know, other than a couple people from my local who I knew, but, you know, was having a hard time with. And so I text the president of Wake at the time, Larry Nillis, and shout out to Larry Nillis. And I said, Larry, how many people in this room do you know that want to do that thing that Rodney just said? Because I've been doing that for a while, and like we could learn how to do that together. And he was like, I think I can get maybe like 10, 12 people in the back of the room. I was like, great. So we go to lunch after that. I sit down next to Kristen, just talking her ear off for like 45 minutes. I'm like, and then we do this, and then we do this. And she was like, graciously listening the whole time. And she's still here, so it obviously wasn't, you know, too annoying. But we gathered this crew, and we met in the back of the room. And I was like, hey, we could do a training around this stuff. And folks were like, yeah, let's do it in 3 weeks. And I was like, whoa. Okay, you know, and clearly there was some hunger, right? Amy, you might have been in that conversation in the back of the room, right? Yeah, Liz Hackney, right? So some of the folks that y'all, you know, Raquel was in the room pretty soon thereafter. So we had this training, and we decided to do some things and went out to Moral Monday that summer, right? And we're walking around, and there's educators everywhere, but the union isn't there. They were hoping that some moderate Republicans were going to hold the line on a backdoor deal, and so they stayed out of Moral Monday to do that. And it was a real losing strategy, because what you saw in front of you at Moral Monday was the collection of people who could transform our state under militant black leadership, to be honest, right? Reverend Barber was putting out a line that was essentially a third Reconstruction, right? This is what we need to do, right? And we were there. And so we're out there sweating buckets every day, gathered like 500 signatures that summer, right? And just started doing trainings and started saying, how do we find each other? How do we find our folks? How do we build up skills? And so Todd mentioned, you know, that year we had walk-ins. That year we had the Decline to Sign effort. That year we did the We Heart Public Schools. And so there was a lot of work that was happening. But if you can see, I don't know it from a distance, but there's some gray. There's some gray here. And most of that has actually, at that moment, began with kind of these internal struggles inside the organization around what really is the purpose of the organization. And so I'll say this one last thing and then switch, and then I'll come back and say a couple things at the end. But what became really clear when I was in union spaces was that there was a really clear difference around two main questions. And the first question is, what is the purpose of this organization? And my estimation, as I saw it, was that there was two different answers. One was the purpose of this organization is to serve its members. There's another way that one could define the purpose of this organization, which was to build leadership and build a movement to defend and transform public schools. I think that's the job of this organization, to build a movement to defend and transform public schools. And it was just really clear that every single debate I was in, every single fight that I was in, every single argument the crew was in was around that question. What is this organization for? And then there quickly became a second question, which was, who gets to decide? And in the way that NCAE and lots of NEA affiliates around the country function, that is left largely to the staff, because they're the sort of more stable element. Leadership turns over, but the staff is there. That felt like an insufficient answer as well, and that a union should be run by its rank and file members. Right. And so from that point, right, we built a caucus inside the organization that said we want to build a movement to defend and transform public schools, and rank and file people should be the lead of this. And so we, that summer and like that fall, we began some training explicitly around anti-racist principles and practices, so that the crew of people that we were building as the core of the caucus could be a force that as we watched the rest of the folks around the state divide us by race, we knew that the union could be a force to unite people across race. And so we started finding folks, doing some trainings, and
that's how I got connected.